Whenever we hear the word commandment, our culture, the way in which we think of this word tends to be very negative. In our culture of freedom and liberty, the moment somebody says, I give you a commandment, there is this implied message that somehow our freedom is being limited, or we're being forced to do something that maybe we don't want to do. So today in the gospel, when we hear Jesus saying, if you love me, you will keep my commandments, there's this real potential for misunderstanding what he's saying. I don't know about you, but I grew up with this moralistic image of Jesus as some type of angry heavenly police officer who was always spying on me to make sure I wasn't having too much fun. And that the whole point of being a Christian was finding ways creatively not to have fun, because I was raised with this notion that the moment you're having fun, you're doing something wrong. And Christianity has all these rules, we're told, all these thou shalt nots, to keep us from doing that. That God is some type of a commanding killjoy. That's not what's going on. That is not what Jesus is saying. Think about this for a second. Jesus was the guy who continually got himself into trouble because he was having too much fun, right? Remember all those stories of celebrating and eating and drinking and feasting and partying with all the wrong kind of people? Do you remember those stories? This isn't some moralistic killjoy. If anything, the opposite. He got in trouble for having too much fun. So when he says commandments, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments, I think we need to take a moment and be a little bit deliberate of figuring out, what do you mean? What are these commandments? So I went back this week, and I read and I went through the Gospels, and I found every time Jesus gave a commandment. The most famous is Jesus reiterating the great commandment of loving God. And then the second greatest commandment that Jesus taught, this is Luke chapter 10, is love your neighbor as yourself. And so they said, okay, all right, great, but who's my neighbor? And so Jesus, again in Luke 10, tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. All of the devout religious people ignore the man who had been beaten up and robbed, and it's the Samaritan, the vile, vowed enemy of the people, the Samaritan who cares for the wounded man who had been beaten half dead. That's who your neighbor is, Jesus says. And then in Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says things like, you have heard it said, love your neighbors but hate your enemies. But I say to you, this is a new commandment, I command you, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I command you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. You have heard it said, do not kill. I say to you, don't even hold a grudge in your heart. These are the commandments that Jesus offers. So when he's saying in the gospel, I give you a new commandment, love as I have loved. Oh, I skipped over. That's John 13. Jesus washes the disciples' feet, and then he says, I've given you an example to follow, so that what I have done, you also may do. This is a new commandment I give to you. Love as I have loved you. You see, Jesus' commandments is not this moral police going out of his way to make sure we have no fun. Jesus' commandments is literally trying to teach us a new way to live. A new way to love. That he commands us to live as the most humble, the lowliest, the servant of all. He commands us to carry our cross. is not commanding us a whole new list of things to do, or thou shalt not. He's trying to teach us a new way of being human, a new way of living in our world, a new way of responding to the evil, the injustice, and the violence of our world. You see, just at Jesus' time, and even still today, our world can be a very evil, unjust, violent place. And there's a lot of people who deeply believe, especially in our culture, a lot of people who deeply believe the only way to handle violence is to respond with overwhelming violence. Our entire country, our culture is built on this deep premise that no one can bring as much violence to bear as we can, therefore we can be the world's police. And we do this by exporting weapons and violence to most of the globe. We even celebrate it. When's the last time you've been to a sporting event and all these weapons of death fly over after we're done singing a national anthem that celebrates violence? Have you listened to the words of our national anthem? So when Jesus gives us a new commandment, it's a very specific commandment about how to respond to a world that believes violence is the only way to do justice. A world that believes that the only response to violence is more violence. And so Jesus gives us a new commandment. To love as he loves. And Jesus' response to violence is this: the cross. Not a weapon, not an army, not a political agenda of power and manipulation and wealth and violence. No. Jesus' response to a world of evil, injustice, and violence is to carry your own cross, to embrace it. This is why so many people at the time of Jesus could not accept him. This is why so many people at the time of Jesus said, sorry, we can't accept your teaching. We won't let ourselves be persuaded to let go of our agenda of violence. But some did accept his message. Some did willingly let go of weapons and any agenda of domination and power. And so the moment that Jesus says, I give you a new commandment, if you love me, you'll keep these commandments, he says something amazing. And again, I think we misunderstand this. The Father will send you a new advocate. Because if we take up Jesus' agenda of refusing to use violence in response to evil and injustice, there's a certain sense where we as people are deeply vulnerable and weak. And so God sends to us another advocate. The word here is actually paraclete. Paraclete is a defender, a protector, a helper, a legal defense attorney, a mentor, a friend, and a guide. You see, if we accept Jesus' commandment of responding to evil, injustice, and violence a certain way, if we refuse to be part of the continuing cycle of violence, if we let that go and embrace our cross, we set ourselves up to be vulnerable to those who would do violence against us. And that's why God sends us another advocate. Because now the Holy Spirit is our protector. The Holy Spirit is our guide. The Holy Spirit is our defense. But if we're going to accept this advocate, we have to let go of our weapons. We have to let go of our love of weapons, our love of war. We have to let go of the false belief that the only way to deal with evil is by doing more evil. That's a challenge. But that's exactly what the Holy Spirit does. And that's why Jesus immediately says The world does not know the Holy Spirit. The world does not understand the Holy Spirit because the culture of the world does not see him and cannot see him, nor can the world understand his agenda, because to the world this is utter foolishness. But to us, who love Jesus, to us who try to accept such a difficult commandment, the Holy Spirit is the very power of God to set us free, to protect us in a way that even we can't understand. There is liberty and truth and power and beauty and love in accepting the Holy Spirit as our protector, as our advocate, not the agenda of war and the weapons of violence. That's the liberty that Jesus has come to give us. And if we do this, as absurd and as countercultural as it is, then the words that St. Peter wrote in our second reading ring true with unbelievable joy. Always be ready, he says. Always be ready to tell others the reason for your hope in Jesus Christ. Always be ready to bear witness to what fills your life with joy, what fills your life with hope. And I would propose to you this morning, what we have to do is accept the absurdity of Jesus' commandment of loving and turning away from any and all agenda of violence. The moment we accept this and embrace the Holy Spirit as our protector, there is a freedom and a liberation that the world can't give. Then we know joy the likes of which no one else has access to except through Christ. And if we grasp this, if we can wrestle with this, then we have what we need to always be ready to tell anyone the reason for the hope we have in Jesus Christ.